Today I'm reviewing another memoir named The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. It's pretty comparable to Educated, which is another amazing memoir that I already did a review on. So I might be comparing them a little bit, but obviously we're still focusing on reviewing The Glass Castle and its many sides. To start with a brief summary. So The Glass Castle's protagonist is Jeanette Walls. She is a pretty average girl in some ways and completely weird in so many others because of her childhood. So let's start with her dad. Her dad is named Rex Walls. He's he's a pretty good dad in many ways, okay? He's really knowledgeable, he's a great improviser, he's a great inventor. He knows a lot about so many different topics. He's a great teacher too. There's just a small issue because all of those things are what happens when he's sober. When he's drunk, he becomes a completely different person and is very, very violent, unpredictable, and causes a lot of antagonistic drive in the story. Then we have Jeanette's mom, who's named Rosemary Walls. She is one of those really, how do I see it, individualistic people. Like, she doesn't really care about responsibility. She doesn't care what other people think about her, what they tell her she should be doing. She just does what she wants to. She's aspiring to become an artist, even though, in my opinion, that is a pretty bad idea considering how talented she is in so many other fields. Then we have Jeanette's siblings. First, we have Lori, her older sister. Lori is described to be pretty book smart, that kind of person. Her younger brother is named Brian, who's described to be brave, and interestingly enough, opposes their father a lot more than the other siblings. And she also has one little sister named Maureen, who's pretty reliant on other people, but is very, very social. The story mainly focuses on their journey because they have to keep moving from place to place to place because of Rex's probably very, very suspicious criminal record and a lot of different reasons. And each section of the book, there's around 3 of them. Each section is just about a certain place they're living and what has happened in each place. Okay, on to the review. We're going to start with emotional variation, and this is where we're going to start comparing this to another amazing memoir, Educated. So The Glass Castle's emotional variation is great. Nothing much to say about this, but it's just great overall. And interestingly enough, it is not as dark as Educated for personal harm. Like, Jeanette herself does not suffer like physical harm as much as the other protagonist in Educated, which you should read. But there's a lot more interpersonal harm in like other aspects. For example, there are like cases of stabbings, that kind of thing happening all the time in The Glass Castle, and with pretty decent descriptions and with a lot more emotional ties to some of the harming than in Educated, I would say. Another thing is that The Glass Castle has by far some of the best storytelling in a long, long time, because this is a person's life, which is not easy to split into sections, into structures, but somehow Jeanette Walls did it, which is just amazing. Another thing that's great is that each character feels certain events differently. You can see the differences between each of the siblings, Lori, Jeanette, Brian, and Maureen. They treat their dad, which is the central force and this driving force of the plot, really, really differently. Like, Jeanette is by far the most loyal. Lori treats it as more of like objective thinking kind of thing, whereas Brian clearly just knows to oppose their dad as much as possible in many cases. Maureen is obviously not as involved in the story, but you can still see how she treats different events differently. And the last things that I really like about this is Jeanette's really complicated relationship with her dad, Rex, is amazing. And it's by far the best part about the book. The fact that she feels sort of loyalty, sort of love, but then realizes the harm that her dad has caused. Overall, just amazing emotional variation. And pretty different from Educated in some ways, but just amazing in a lot of cases. Okay, now on to ideas, topics, and themes of The Glass Castle. Again, I'm going to draw some parallels to Educated because they are pretty similar. Remember how in Educated, there was a really big part of the book, a really big section that was focused almost entirely on the idea of loyalty and trust, how much you should be loyal to your family, but also using clear objective judgment to realize that they are full of crap and that they're doing a lot of really weird things that they shouldn't be. Well, The Glass Castle has a milder version of this in some ways, but also deeper in another. So I'll just start with the basic idea. The Glass Castle is an interesting name. When you just look at the title, you have no idea what it means, because why would there be a glass castle? It makes no sense. And in the book, the Glass Castle represents Jeanette's dad's trust, in a way, the trust that all of their entire family has in Rex Walls. The reason for this is that, spoilers, the Glass Castle is a project that Rex Walls had been promising to do for a long time, build a giant, entirely glass castle in the middle of the desert, or somewhere else, wherever they're going to live, and then have their entire family live in it to become fully reliant and truly have an amazing living space that they can be proud of. This is a dream that their family has held on to for a long time, especially Jeanette. But then as we see some of the foundations getting destroyed, as you can see their trust getting melted away, so does the idea of the glass castle. Each time it's mentioned, it's weaker and weaker and weaker, just like Jeanette's trust in her dad and realizing that her dad can't help her that much anymore. It's a really interesting symbolism. It's really, really awesome in the book. It's a lot more, even more significant than in Educated. Although I will admit Educated has some better symbolism in other areas, but I digress. It's just pretty cool. Another one is obviously social injustice, because they're in poverty, like their entire family is almost constantly in poverty. And an interesting thing is, despite being in poverty, most of them are relatively happy with their lives. Jeanette and Lori and Brian, the main siblings, and possibly Maureen, they don't like it that much. However, both of the parents, both Rose and Rex, genuinely are fine with poverty. Later in the book, more spoilers, when Jeanette is far better off, both her parents are still homeless because they just don't want to be really that rich. They don't care too much about their place in society in that way. And it's a really interesting way to like show social injustice. Sometimes giving charity won't actually even help. Anyway, so yeah, that's basically the ideas, topics, themes of the Glass Castle. The idea of trust, the glass castle, and social injustice and poverty. Now on to reading quality. As I mentioned before, the Glass Castle, especially for a memoir, is just so good at making the plot make sense, making it structured, and making the storyline all flow so smoothly. Like, again, I'm going to draw another parallel to Educated. For Educated, one of the flaws I would say is that the story is not fully coherent all the time. It has no structure. It is literally telling the story of one person from beginning to end. Like Westover's journey is just one big journey. Whereas in the Glass Castle, Jeanette clearly separates distinct sections of her life and how she felt during those sections, which makes it more or less a book in many cases, and much more closer to a regular fictional book. But in my opinion, this does make it so much easier to read and understand that I just really like the written quality in this book. Okay, so the only flaw I really have with the Glass Castle as a memoir is the fact that the siblings don't get to shine enough. And I know this is from Jeanette's, perspective, so I can't really blame this too hard. However, I would have still liked to see more about Lori and Brian and Maureen in the story in some sections, most especially in Welsh and in New York, but it's still pretty good overall. And I'm basically entirely fine with the story anyway. Okay, so as a final score overall, I would say The Glass Castle deserves a 19 out of 20. The reason for this is that although everything was done pretty well, nothing except for the storyline, okay? Nothing but besides the storyline was done extremely, like, outrageously, uniquely, super well. Like, only the storyline, in my opinion, was just completely flawless. Everything else was really good, but not amazing to an extent where it deserves an amazing price. So I would say 19 out of 20 is pretty fair for this book overall. And yeah, that'll be my final score. That was my review of The Glass Castle. I hope you enjoyed it. It was done really well. The symbolism, the theme, and especially the storyline and the plot writing, the driving force of the dad. And speaking of the dad, this is going to be my final quote from the book, and my favorite quote by far. I turned to look at Dad one more time. Hey, he said. He winked and pointed his finger at me. Have I ever let you down? He started chuckling because he knew there was only one way I could ever answer that question. I just smiled, and then I closed the door.